We often think of Eleanor Roosevelt, as the quintessential First Lady poised diplomatic.
Right, that's the public image.
Exactly. But the material you shared, this specific section from Zishonoy, is called Eleanor Roosevelt, A Force for Change. It paints a really different picture of her early life. Lots of challenges.
Oh, absolutely. She was so much more than just the First Lady. A real force of nature, you could say.
Force of nature feels right.
Hmm.
And looking at these excerpts, what really jumps out is this huge personal transformation she went through.
It really does. That later strength and public presence, it's a world away from the vulnerability described in her childhood and teenage years.
That contrast is exactly why we wanted to dive into this. You were interested in sort of how people overcome really tough times, right? How they become agents for change.
Mm-hmm. Understanding that journey.
So yeah, our mission for this deep dive is to really try and understand the key moments, the people, the influences that shaped Eleanor Roosevelt's, frankly, extraordinary life and her lasting impact. Let's unpack this together.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Let's start at the beginning, her formative years. The material suggests this mix of outward privilege, but also deep emotional difficulty.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, born 1884, Roosevelt's, Livingston's, pedigree-wise, she had it all, seemingly.
Right, top-tier New York society.
But as the text highlights, that privilege didn't shield her from, significant emotional pain.
No, it sounds like it didn't. Her father, Elliot Roosevelt, that's Theodore Roosevelt's brother, right?
Right.
He struggled with alcoholism, mental health issues. It created a really unstable home. And her mother, Anna Rebecca Hall, she comes across as quite cold, emotionally distant.
Yeah, even critical. That nickname she gave Eleanor Granny, that's just harsh.
It really paints a picture of a lonely childhood, doesn't it? Despite the family name.
It does. But, the text also points out these moments, maybe fleeting, where her father was present and affectionate. He called her his little golden girl.
Oh.
And importantly, it seems he instilled in her some early sense of compassion, empathy for others.
Those moments must have been so important later on, like little seeds planted.
Exactly. Especially considering what came next.
Right. The tragedy, losing both parents so young. Her mother died from diphtheria when Eleanor was only 8.
8, yeah. And then her father just 2 years later, apparently after a suicide attempt.
God, just unimaginable. Orphaned at 10, that had to have a massive impact.
A profound one. The text really emphasizes this. She went to live with her maternal grandmother, Mary Livingston Ludlow Hall.
Which provided some stability, I guess.
Structurally, yes.
Yeah.
But it was a very strict Victorian household, more focused on proper behavior, decorum, than emotional warmth or support.
So reinforcing that sense of isolation she might have already felt.
Quite possibly, yeah. It sounds like it wasn't just the loss, but the kind of chilly emotional climate that followed.
And it wasn't just her grandmother. The extended family had a role too, both good and bad, it seems.
Precisely. On the one hand, you have her uncle, Theodore Roosevelt.
The future president.
Right? Maybe not always around physically, but he represented this powerful model of public service, using privilege for good. Civic responsibility.
That's a strong positive influence, even from a distance.
Definitely. But then you have the Hall relatives.
Ah, her mother's side.
Yes. And according to the text, they really seem to heighten her insecurities, especially about her looks. The focus on conventional beauty, aunts making critical comments.
That's tough, especially for a young girl already dealing with so much loss. It sounds like that contributed to lifelong self-doubt.
It certainly seems that way from the description.
But what about her brothers, Elliot Jr. and Gracie Hall Roosevelt? Did she have a better connection there?
It's interesting. The text mentions her corresponding with them, developing this sense of responsibility, almost a nurturing instinct, even though they were separated for time after their parents died.
So maybe finding a way to connect, to care for someone, even then.
It suggests that, yeah, an early glimpse of her capacity for connection may be filling a void left by the lack of a stable parent-child bond.
You can almost see how that deep need for connection, for acceptance, could eventually fuel her empathy for others, for the vulnerable.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Now, thinking about her education, initially it was quite limited, right? Private tutors of home.
Yeah, typical for her class, I suppose. Etiquette, French, music. Not exactly pushing intellectual boundaries.
Not really fostering critical thinking.
But then the big change. Allenswood Academy. Near London, she was 15.
Yes. And the text calls this a watershed moment. It really sounds like it.
What made it so different?
Primarily, the headmistress, Marie Souvestre, a progressive figure who actually saw Eleanor's potential taste, her intellect, her character.
Someone finally recognized her.
Exactly. Sylvestre encouraged her to think for herself, included her in serious discussions, really built her confidence. It was transformative.
It sounds like she blossomed there, became fluent in French, loved literature, finding her intellectual feet.
She really did.
Yeah.
Which must have made returning to New York for her social debut in 1902 quite jarring.
Oh, I bet. From that stimulating environment back to, well, the debutante scene.
Yeah, the text notes how out of place she felt, not fitting the mold of the conventionally pretty, vivacious debutante.
That self-doubt again.
Mm-hmm. But even then, she started to push back against expectations, didn't she?
Yeah, instead of just focusing on parties and finding a husband, she got involved with the Junior League, teaching immigrant kids on the Lower East Side.
That's huge. Direct exposure to poverty, to social issues, way outside her usual bubble.
It feels like the real start of her education in social justice, laying the groundwork for everything later.
Absolutely. Seeking something more meaningful than society balls.
Okay, so that kind of sets the stage for the next chapter, right? Marriage.
Right, part 2. Marriage to Franklin D. Roosevelt and finding her way into public life. How did they actually connect? They were distant cousins.
Fifth cousins, once removed. So they knew of each other, ran in the same circles. But the connection really sparked up around 1902. Franklin was at Harvard.
And what drew him to her? According to the text, her thoughtfulness, her depth. She wasn't like the other debutantes.
And for Eleanor, given her background.
It seems his attention was deeply meaningful. The text quotes her saying, "For the first time, I felt that someone needed me."
Wow, that says so much about her emotional state then, that yearning for connection.
It really does. But the engagement in 1903 wasn't smooth sailing, was it? Franklin's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt.
Yes, the formidable Sarah. The text paints her as quite possessive.
Very. Viewing Eleanor as a rival, trying to delay the wedding, you get the sense she was a major force to contend with.
Even Uncle Theodore's comment at the wedding, keeping the name in the family, sort of hints at complex dynamics.
It does. And Sarah's influence continued. That wedding gift of the connected townhouse in New York.
Yeah, basically ensuring she was always right there, not much room for Eleanor to establish her own space.
Exactly. It foreshadowed some real challenges for Eleanor's independence within the marriage early on.
So, difficult start with the mother-in-law. And then early married life, she stepped into the expected roles. Wife, mother.
Initially, yes. 6 children between 1906 and 1916, though one died in infancy, relying on nannies, managing the household.
But Franklin's political career was starting to take off. New York State Senate in 1910.
Right. And while Eleanor played the traditional supportive wife role at first, the text suggests she was already developing her own interests, women's issues, children's welfare, making her own contacts.
And the move to Washington, D.C. in 1913 must have accelerated that. Franklin became Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
Huge shift. Suddenly she's in the Capitol, exposed to women deeply involved in politics. Alice Paul, Lillian Walter mentioned. Her awareness of suffrage, social justice, it just grew rapidly.
It sounds like D.C. was another kind of awakening for her.
It seems like it. And then came World War I.
How did that affect her?
It was another catalyst. She threw herself into Red Cross work, visiting wounded soldiers, organizing relief efforts. It wasn't just society volunteering. It was hands-on, demanding work.
Developing practical skills, connecting with all sorts of people.
Exactly. Building organizational skills, learning to work across social barriers, really finding her capabilities.
But then came a really difficult personal blow,
Yeah.
1918.
Ah, yes. The discovery of Franklin's affair with Lucy Mercer. The text describes it as devastating, a profound betrayal.
And she offered him a divorce.
She did. But they decided against it. Politics, family pressure, the children, a complex decision.
But it changed everything between them, didn't it?
Fundamentally, the end of intimacy, as the text puts it, but also, maybe ironically, a turning point for her independence. It says she faced herself and her world honestly for the first time.
That's powerful, like the betrayal forced kind of reckoning.
It seems so. She poured her energy into political work with this renewed vigor. League of Women Voters, other women's groups. Really honing her public speaking, her organizing.
And finding her own support system.
Yes, crucial friendships with progressive women like Nancy Cook and Marion Dickerman. They provided emotional support, intellectual partnership, really important.
And then another massive challenge, Franklin contracting polio in 1921.
Monumental.
Yeah.
Paralysis. This changed their lives, their dynamic, completely.
How did Eleanor respond?
She stepped up incredibly, became, as the text says, his legs and eyes. traveling for him, speaking for him.
Forcing her to overcome her shyness.
Absolutely. It pushed her onto the public stage in a way nothing else had. She developed serious political skill, learned the ropes by doing.
And she wasn't just representing him, right? She was building her own political base.
Definitely. Through the women's division of the New York State Democratic Committee, she had her own agenda. Labor rights, women's rights, social reform. She wasn't just an extension of Franklin.
And the Valkill Industries venture.
Yeah, that reflects her interest in economic justice, craftsmanship, plus her own administrative abilities.
So by the time Franklin became governor of New York in 1928,
she was far more than just the governor's wife. She was a political force in her own right. A partner, absolutely, but one with her own network, her own platform, her own voice, like through her column. Theirs was a partnership of shared ideals, if not romance.
What an incredible journey just to get to that point. Yeah. From that insecure young girl. It really speaks to that quote about facing fear.
You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stopped to look fear in the face. She lived it.
Okay, so that brings us to the White House years, part 3. Redefining the First Lady role and her global impact. How did she revolutionize it?
Well, in almost every way imaginable, especially given the crises of the Depression and World War II. She refused to be just a hostess.
Those press conferences were a big part of it, right?
Huge. And exclusively for female reporters. Think about the opportunities that created for women in journalism back then. It was deliberate.
That's brilliant. And her newspaper column, My Day, for nearly 30 years.
Unprecedented. Direct communication, sharing her views on everything from daily life to global affairs, unfiltered access.
It's hard to picture now. And her traveling.
Oh, constantly. Not just official trips. She went everywhere. Coal mines, sharecropper shacks, tenements. She wanted to see things for herself.
To connect with ordinary people.
Yes, across race, across class. And crucially, she took what she saw and heard back to the president. She was his eyes and ears on the ground, a conduit for the voiceless.
And her commitment to racial equality was particularly bold for the time.
Extremely. The Marian Anderson incident is probably the most famous example.
When the Daughters of the American Revolution barred Anderson from singing at Constitution Hall because she was black.
Right. Eleanor resigned from the DR in protest and helped arrange for Anderson to sing at the Lincoln Memorial instead. A hugely symbolic act.
And she pushed for anti-lynching laws, fair treatment for black soldiers.
Yes, and she cultivated genuine friendships with civil rights leaders like Walter White and Mary McLeod Bethune. It wasn't just symbolic, it was personal commitment.
That took real courage in the context of the 1930s and 40s.
Absolutely. Now, after Franklin died in 1945, many might have expected her to retire from public life.
But she didn't. She was, what, 60?
60 years old. And President Truman appointed her as a delegate to the newly formed United Nations.
A whole new chapter.
And arguably one of her most significant. She was elected chair of the UN Commission on Human Rights.
The body tasked with drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Exactly. And she was the driving force behind it. The text emphasizes how she had to navigate intense ideological battles. Cold War tensions were already high.
Between the West, the Soviet bloc, developing nations, trying to find common ground on fundamental rights.
It required incredible diplomatic skill, persistence, and her deep, unwavering belief in universal human dignity. She wouldn't give up.
And they adopted it in December 1948.
Yes, December 10th. She received a standing ovation at the UN General Assembly. It was a monumental achievement, a foundational document for the world.
It really cemented her legacy on a global scale, didn't it?
Absolutely. So, wrapping up this deep dive, it's just so clear her legacy is immense. It's not just about being First Lady. It's about this incredible arc of transformation and impact.
Yeah, she offers such a relevant model even today. For you, listening, thinking about dealing with polarized views, her effort to listen, find common ground.
It's incredibly relevant, her idealism in cynical times. And honestly, for anyone facing self-doubt, her journey from deep insecurity to becoming this confident global leader.
Yeah.
It's just profoundly inspiring.
Definitely. The big takeaways for me are, well, the power of empathy, really seeing people, the impact one person can make, and just the sheer importance of fighting for the vulnerable.
Couldn't agree more.
And that quote about human rights, where do they begin?
In small places close to home.
Exactly. It brings it right down to earth, doesn't it? Still so resonant for any kind of grassroots activism today.
It reminds us that these big ideas have to live in our daily lives and our communities.
So a final thought for everyone listening. Think about those small places close to home in your own life. Where could you apply even a fraction of Eleanor Roosevelt's commitment to justice and human rights? What's one seemingly small action you could take that might, ripple outwards? Something to think about.